Hello, this is Gordon Samuel of Osborne Samuel, and welcome to our stand at the online London Art Fair 2021. Sorry that we're not there to greet you personally at the Business Design Centre in Islington, but we look forward to perhaps seeing you same time next year. But this is our online presentation, and I hope you enjoy it. Let me tell you a little bit about the gallery. It was founded in June of 2004 by Peter Osborne, who was then running Berkeley Square Gallery, and I had a small shop in the Mews behind him in Bruton Place, and we were doing shows together. And we decided in June of 2004 that it would be a good idea to form Osborne Samuel. And that was the beginning of it. And Tanya Sutton became a director in 2012. And so in this show, we are showing modern and contemporary British art, which is our speciality, paintings and sculpture. We also have a very strong print department, and we have four contemporary artists that we're showing this time, John Blackburn, Melanie Comber, Brendan Burns, and Sean Henry, and a selection from our very large modern British collection. We have a very strong online presence at our website, www.osbornesamuel.com, which you can find on your tablet, laptop, desktop, or phone. So please do have a look. And I thought I would sort of give you a little bit of background of what we do throughout the year. In normal times, we would have 6 or 7 exhibitions in the gallery. And also we participate in a number of national and international art fairs. Our year starts at Islington at the Business Design Centre for the London Art Fair. And what you're seeing is a shot of our stand in 2020. Concurrently, we also show at BRAFA in Brussels, where Peter and Tanya man the stand, while Brian and I man the stand in Islington. And then in March, late March, we go to the European Fine Art Fair at Maastricht, where we share a stand with Connaught Brown, and it works very, very successfully. And I think we've been there now for over 10 years. And then in May, we show our prints at the Royal Academy at the London Original Print Fair, which has now gone on for something like 37 years. I was one of the founders of the fair back in 1985. So very, very proud to be there every year, and we show the best of modern British prints that we can. And then we have one of my favorite fairs, which is the Masterpiece Fair, which takes place on the south lawns of the Royal Hospital in Chelsea. And it's an absolutely knockout fair, and I'm hoping that it will happen this year in June. So do keep a lookout from our website and for information. We then go to the British Art Fair, which used to be known as the 2021 British Art Fair, which was then at the Royal College of Art, but these days has been at the Saatchi Gallery for 2 years, but sadly not last year, 2020. And we hope that 2021 will see us back there, but again, look on our website and keep an eye open. Then our prints go to New York, and as you can see on this shot, very strong works from the 1930s Grosvenor School of Modern Art. There are drawings as well. There are avant-garde British prints by Wadsworth and contemporary prints like the Jim Dine that you see and William Kentridge. And then we end the year in the first week of December at Art Miami, which Peter has been attending for over 30 years now, and we have a tremendous success there and a very varied look. I mean, we're quite different to our London look. I mean, here you can see much more contemporary things, but you also absolutely see classic things like the Henry Moore right in front in the middle there, and Lynn Chadwick. Then we begin our showing at the London Art Fair, and we begin with the 89-year-old John Blackburn. This is John Blackburn's Brown's 1961 Revisited. Revisited because it is exactly the same composition as a 1961 painting which was shown at the John Moores Biennale in the early 1960s. This painting is part of a series of works that 89-year-old John Blackburn painted in 2019. These are contemplations of images he made in another time, reimagined and reproclaimed, made by the same mind but by different artists. This duality, this state of being both the author and a different author simultaneously, intrigued Blackburn. He uses Frank Sinatra as an analogy. The same song sung by the same man, the same singer 50 years on, but with a different treatment, a different voice, and a different resonance. This is a photo of his last show with us in 2018 titled The Fire Paintings. There is a virtual version of the catalogue on our website, a sort of flip catalogue that you can view the whole show in. I first came across Brendan Burns' work in early 2008 when we gave the gallery gratis for a month to the collection of the Derek Williams Trust, which is housed at the National Museum of Wales in Cardiff. We met again when a benefactor of his funded a wonderful book on his work, and I went a few months later to visit his studio in Cardiff and personally bought 2 paintings for myself and offered him a show. Since then, he's got a gallery, or we have got him a gallery in New York, where he's had 2 exhibitions at Rosenberg and Company, run by Marion Rosenberg, who is the granddaughter of Picasso's dealer before the war in Paris. And in early 2020, he went to New Zealand to show at the Artist Gallery in Auckland. He was going to have a show there in April, but sadly his stay was shortened last year because of COVID, and he had to come back to England before his 3 months were up. And we've also got him a show at the Open Eye Gallery in Edinburgh, which has been a successful partnership. His works are tactile, they're painted in a mixture of oil paint and wax on linen canvas. There is a video of Brendan speaking on both the works in this show at London Art Fair. So do watch it on our page of the LAF website. It's really well worth watching and very informative. This powerful study for Sacrificial Figure was made in 1952, the same year as his prize-winning The Unknown Political Prisoner competition in 1952. It resembles a found object, an elongated horse's head, decaying flesh, sunken sockets where the eyes were. It would take too long to articulate the significance of this compelling sculpture. I would suggest going to our website, where Judith LeGrove has written a truly insightful essay on this particular sculpture. So if you go to osbornesamuel.com and look up Reg Butler, you'll find it there. Osborne Samuel are renowned for their exhibitions of modern British sculpture, and were acknowledged world experts on the work of Lynn Chadwick and Henry Moore. Lynn Chadwick trained originally as an architect, not a sculptor. His training, however, continued to influence his working methods as a sculptor throughout his career. Chadwick welded metal rods to create a skeleton structure rather than carving his material, which was the more traditional artistic route at the time. He was drawing in a 3D format with metal rods and then packing the skeleton with stolite, which is a type of plaster and iron filings which dried quickly but could also be scraped and smoothed using different textures and power tools. The rods are clearly visible in the heads and wings of his bronze, the solid lines creating a lightness and dynamism to his conjoined couple. This is very much a sculpture that straddles the earlier geometry of fear works, a phrase coined by Herbert Reed, and later works with the polished faces that we're all familiar with. Prunella Clough, or Prue as I knew her, was a delightful woman. She taught at Wimbledon School of Art, which she absolutely loved, and she had a really generous spirit. And I know for a fact that she sometimes bought her students' work to help them out financially without them knowing. She came from a very well-off family. and was the niece of the great Anglo-Irish designer Eileen Gray. During the early 1950s, she had a strong interest in industrial themes that dominated her work. Lorry drivers, female factory workers at the Peak Freeze biscuit factory, printers at work, manual workers opening manholes, men gutting fish at Lowestoft, and here in Barrels in a Yard from about 1955, she paints with a restricted palette, except for that yellow focal point with a solitary figure and a solid column. She was renowned for her observation, her peripheral vision, seeing what we miss in everyday life when we hurriedly look at our environment. This arresting work by Melanie Comber is painted in oil paint and pigment dust on canvas. The paint is applied very thickly onto the prepared canvas, onto which pigment dust is sprayed or dusted on from various angles to get the acquired effect. Here, the paint is applied in parallel tracks to a point on the horizon, creating a narrowing perspective of a landscape. East Neuk, the title of this work, is an area on the east coast of Fife in Scotland, just north of Edinburgh. Neuk is the Scottish word for nook or corner. It is an area rich in geology, of wide, sweeping agricultural fields and desolate, craggy beaches. The sea, offshore houses, and industrial oil rigs are juxtaposed with colonies of gannets and shoals of dolphins. Melanie made the painting as a direct result of visiting the area, learning about its geology and wandering the beaches. The painting is a response to the experience of place, a monument to the experience, of far-reaching horizon views, of ancient rocks, of light and falling on human traces in the sand. We have shown Melanie's work for several years at LAF, and we've sold 1 or 2 paintings every year. The Osborne Samuel Gallery represents the John Craxton estate, and this is one of 2 paintings released by the estate late in 2019, and this is the first time it's been exhibited, albeit virtually. I have made a short video about this particular painting available on our page of the London Art Fair website and on our own website, especially for the fair, so I hope you'll watch it and find it informative. Later this year, we're working with the estate on a show of Craxton's work prior to 1946, and also to celebrate the launch of his biography by Ian Collins, one of his trustees. This photo is of his hugely successful exhibition, John Craxton in Greece, The Unseen Works. All the paintings seen in the photo were sold during the show. Incidentally, the show was on concurrently with a wonderful exhibition that the British Museum had of 3 friends, John Craxton, Patrick Lee Fermor, and Geeka. Sean Henry has been represented by Osborne Samuel for the past 20 years. He recently had a very successful exhibition during the last lockdown, or partial lockdown, with us late last year. Incidentally, the show is still intact in the gallery, so perhaps when this lockdown ends, you might be able to catch some of it. Surprisingly, a number of the pieces were sold, despite having been closed for half the show. I think what helped enormously are the 2 videos that are available on our website. And there's also a walk around the exhibition with Sean talking about his work. So please do watch it on our page of the LAF website, and scroll down to the bottom and you can view each of the 4 videos produced, especially for London Art Fair. My main interest in my painting has always been colour, space and light. And space and colour is the subject of my painting today, to the exclusion of everything else. So said the artist Patrick Heron. In 1956, Heron returned to Cornwall after spending over half a decade in London, and was inspired by the gardens surrounding his new home, Eagle's Nest, where he began his stripe paintings and his first garden paintings. The development from his figurative work was in part a response to the work of American abstract expressionist, whose work he saw as bringing a new kind of energy and inventiveness, but also from the continual influence of great French colorists Bonnat and Matisse. From 1958, he began to paint fields of colour, containing soft-edged squares and discs, In 1963, the critic Norbert Linton wrote the defining phrase about Heron's latest paintings: "It is not possible even to distinguish significantly between the forms and the colour fields they inhibit." During the 1950s and 60s, Hilton began to spend more time in West Cornwall. He dismantled his London studio and moved permanently to Cornwall in 1965 to a new home and studio in Portalloch. He became a prominent member of the St. Ives School and gained an international reputation. In 1963, he won the John Moores Painting Prize and was appointed CBE in 1968. Sadly, he was plagued by alcoholism, and in 1974 he was confined to bed as an invalid. But he continued to paint quite prolifically in gouache. His work became less abstract in his later years, often being based on the nude or images of animals. There was a streak of the erotic in Hilton's painting, and in this work there is an ambiguity between the landscape and the figure, with earth colours, a strange green vegetal form, and human contours, inevitably female. He died in Portalloch, not far from St. Ives, in 1975. Peter Kinley was born Peter Schwartz in 1926 in Vienna. His father was Jewish, and the family was forced to leave after the Anschluss in 1938. Peter was sent to England, and he was evacuated to Lytham St. Anne's in Lancashire and was fostered by a Catholic family while his parents were interned in France. From 1944 to 48, he served in the British Army and then studied at the Dusseldorf Academy from 1948 to 49 and at St. Martin's School of Art from 1949 to 1953. He exhibited in the Six Young Contemporaries exhibition at Gampelfies in 1951 and was influenced by Nicholas de Staal's exhibition in London in 1953, as were many young British artists at the time. Kinley's first one-man show was in London at Gampel's in 1954 and in New York at Paul Rosenberg & Co. in January 1961. He taught at St. Martin's School of Art from 1954 and later at Bath Academy in Corsham. The early impasto de Staal-influenced paintings gave way to a much thinner application of paint in the late 1960s onwards. His subjects were of domesticity, the landscape, the surrounding houses, internally and externally. This figure is most likely his second wife, Pat. Osborne and Samuel are Henry Moore specialists and have dealt in the artist's work for over 40 years. This autumn, we will have a museum-quality exhibition in our gallery in London. We have drawn on this depth of knowledge and sourced unique works from private collections, many of which have not been seen in public for decades. Standing and Seated Figures is from the early post-war period, 1948, the year that Moore won the celebrated International Sculpture Prize at the Venice Biennale. Moore's drawings were ideas for sculpture. The figures are solidly placed on the ground, and here Moore creates a uniform space with the coloured crayon backdrop. Each figure is drawn in three-quarter pose, alluding to the full sculptural weight and presence of the figure in the round. Henry Moore was fascinated by the landscape, the sculpture within it and reflecting it, and found objects such as bones and stones. Two-piece reclining figure is a culmination of this lifelong fascination. In his own words, "I did the first sculpture in two pieces almost without intending to. But after I'd done it, then the second one became a conscious idea. I realized what an advantage a separated two-piece composition could have in relating figures to landscape. Knees and breast are mountains. Once these two parts become separated, you don't expect it to be a naturalistic figure. Therefore, you can justifiably make it a landscape or a rock. Each piece becomes like a metaphor in poetry, giving each element a new aspect and perhaps a new meaning." Ben Nicholson's work in Italy, although closely related to the central concerns of his art, is a special category in his oeuvre, which demonstrates his appreciation of Italian architecture and landscape. He visited Italy in 1950, and this was his first trip to the country since the end of the Second World War. Nicholson produced various drawings of some of his most favourite views throughout Italy, the regions of Tuscany, Lazio, and this drawing of Assisi and Umbria. Peter Caroche has commented that, laying no claim to a technical or historical knowledge of architecture, what interested him was the shape, the proportion, the lie of the building. Buildings, like objects, were a starting point only. Naturally, there was no point in mere imitation. Architecture and landscape offered an opportunity to combine his love of precise structure in his feeling of poetry and astute sensitivity to the spirit of place. I knew Patrick Proctor really well. He was a friend and he was a colleague during my years at the Redfern Gallery when I worked very closely with him. I think many would agree that he was an exceptional talent at his chosen medium of watercolour, probably one of the best of the post-war generation in Britain. For me, at his best, he rivaled his great friend David Hockney. But sadly, he took to drink, and in 1999, a fire destroyed his Manchester Street flat and all the work in it, and drove him from a neighbourhood he had graced with his hats and trailing scarves and velvet coats and carpet slippers for 40 years. This watercolour is one of a number Proctor made from drawings done in New York, when he and his lover Gervase Griffiths and Ozzie Clark were staying at the apartment of John Kloss, a fashion designer friend of Clark's who was away on business. The subjects are Eric Emerson, a dancer who appeared in many of Warhol's films, and Gervase Griffiths. Alan was another great friend during my early years. I worked with him from 1970 to 1978 when he left to join the Anneli Juda Gallery. In March 1952, taken on by Rex Nankivell in his Redfern Gallery, the unknown art student Reynolds exhibited 34 paintings at his first solo show to great acclaim, and the show sold out. That exhibition led to many others and into museum collections at home and abroad. Through the 1950s, the work evolved and became semi-abstract, but he was still attuned to those rhythms of nature and painted assiduously from nature: grasses, seeds, teasels, dandelions, growing tendrils and leaves. His studies in monochrome or coloured with gouache or watercolour were annotated with neat ink observations about plant growth, crowded in margins or tentatively across the image. He was the most significant English painter to emerge in the early 1950s. Alan Reynolds was an artist whose career falls into two halves: the landscape and abstract painter of the 50s and 60s, and the constructivist artist of the last 45 years of his life. With the Juda Gallery, his work became concrete, and he gained a new European collector base for his geometric abstract works. On graduating from the Royal College of Art in 1955, Joe Tilson won the Rome Prize and travelled to Italy, where he met his future wife, Jocelyn Mostyn, and shared a studio with her in Venice. This began a love of Italy that provided both an anchor and a focus for his work, from the early paintings to his current work. During the 1950s, Tilson made his paintings of Tuscany, a landscape that nurtured and informed the work of Renaissance artists. The Val d'Orchi is distinctive for its flat chalk plains and conical hills. In San Quirico di Dorchi, Tilson renders this landscape using thick impasto bulked with sand and grit, and a palette drawn from the dust-coloured valley. There is an insistent rhythm to the patterning of the hills against the plateau and sky, while the composition possesses a strong tonal unity, from the warmth of terracotta to the chalk-white cadmium yellow and misty blue light touching the hills. This is a wonderful early gouache by Keith Vaughan, right at the end of the war when he was stationed at Eden Camp near Malton in Yorkshire. I've created a short audio visual about this painting that can be accessed if you scroll down on our page from the London Art Fair website, or you can access it from our own Osborne Samuel website, and I hope you'll find it interesting. We're leading dealers in Vaughan's paintings and gouaches, and we've produced 4 major exhibitions of his work and helped Lunt Humphreys in publishing the monograph by Philip Vann and Gerard Hastings that they published in 2012. John Wells qualified as a doctor in 1930. He took up an appointment as a general practitioner for the Scilly Isles from 1936 till 1945, having worked in a number of hospitals prior to his appointment. He was largely self-taught, apart from attending evening classes at St Martin's School of Art in the late 1920s, whilst continuing his medical training during the day. Apart from that, the only other training was studying under Stanhope Forbes, the painter in Newlyn, during a visit to Cornwall in 1928. Whilst in Cornwall that year, he was introduced to Christopher Wood and Ben Nicholson and his wife Winifred Nicholson. Ben became a lifelong friend, and when time allowed, Wells would make the occasional trip to visit him at his Hampstead studio in London. During the war years, Naum Garbo, an influential sculptor, theorist, and key figure in Russia's post-revolution avant-garde and in the development of 20th century sculpture, moved to Cornwall. During his visits to Nicholson and Hepworth, Wells met Garbo, who became a major and lasting influence upon him. After the war, Wells decided to become a full-time professional artist and bought one of Forbes's former studios in the artistic community of Newlyn. In 1946, he exhibited with Winifred at the Lefebvre Gallery in London, and in 1947 with Ben Nicholson, Hepworth and Peter Lanyon at Downing's Bookshop in St Ives, then at the Salon des Réalités Nouvelles, Paris in 1949, and at the 1951 São Paulo Biennale, and then at the Derlacher Gallery in New York in 1952, 1958, and 1960. This painting, entitled 1948, was bought directly from Wells in 1940 by George Dix, a partner at the Derlacher Gallery in New York, and remained in his collection for many, many years.